host, Kang Yana, was invited to the Korean premiere of Graeme Murphy's Giselle. Giselle is one of the most celebrated classical ballets that has stood the test of time since its premiere in Paris in 1841. It was given new life by Australian choreographer Graeme Murphy this year. A prominent choreographer from Australia, Graeme Murphy. Originally a dancer, he discovered his true passion for dance, and over the course of 31 years since 1976, he's choreographed some 50 ballets for the Sydney Dance Company. As a prolific choreographer, Graeme Murphy moves between the classical and the modern, bringing forth exquisite and innovative dance sequences. He is best known for taking traditional stories and making them relevant to modern audiences.
Graeme, thank you so much for being here.
It's a great pleasure. I'm so happy to talk to you, Jan.
And congratulations on your big success of this world premiere of New Giselle.
Thank you so much.
And how do you feel? You must be relieved more than anything.
It is always, whatever new work you do, there's so much passion and energy expended that at the end of it you feel like you have nothing left.
Yeah, it's like giving a labor to a baby.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then you wait to see what will happen and what it will grow into.
Mm-hmm. But before we talk about Giselle and your father, I want to talk about you first.
Okay.
When was it your first time, or which ballet was your first creation which helped you to gain fame worldwide?
Well, it's a long time ago. It was when I was still first in the corps de ballet of the Australian Ballet. And they were very good in that they started to develop choreographic workshops so that people who were interested could try their hand. And I don't know, I think I'd always been interested in choreography. I'm passionate about making dance, and I always was. And sometimes I think because I wasn't the perfect prince, you know, my profile wasn't immaculate, my technique wasn't fabulous. I started thinking, you know, will I ever get the opportunity? So I started choreographing on myself a little, just to test the water. And then this choreographic competition came along, and I did a piece, and it starred Janet Vernon, my partner in life and in art and in the world. Yeah. And it was, I realized that what I did was a surprise to people. It wasn't what they expected. We're talking about in the late 60s, and so suddenly people going, but we laughed, that was funny, that was fun, that was different. And I thought to myself, I want to choreograph things that are different.
Oh wow.
That was the beginning.
Oh wow. Of course, as a choreographer, you do a lot of creative works, but you also like to give a new life to the old classic ballets, such as Nutcracker, Swan Lake, now this time, of course, Giselle. When and how did the desire to reinterpret classical ballets begin?
Very early on, I did a work for my company, Sydney Dance Company, which was called Poppy. This was in the late 70s. And it was the first contemporary full-length work. And it was a work that was about the Ballet Russe, it was about Jean Cocteau, and I remember thinking, I have to condense Spectre into 2 minutes. I have to do Rite of Spring in 3 minutes, because we were doing this strange work about all the works of the Ballet Russe. And I thought, these works are so fascinating, but do audiences still relate to works that were created in the early 1900s, and some that were with very contemporary scores for that period, you know, people like Stravinsky and Ravel, Debussy, etc. So I started to do a little, and I actually did a new Daphnis and Chloe to the Ravel, and a new L'après-midi du Fond, and people were revived their interest in them. And it wasn't until quite a few later that I did my first major full-length work, Nutcracker. I remember thinking to myself, I don't believe in this story. What is the rats and soldiers, and what is actually the story? And when you analyze the story, there isn't much story. So I decided to delve into the history of Australian dance. And in Australia, the Russian influence was amazing. Many of the Russians came during the war, were trapped there, and stayed, and started to develop their own companies and their own style. And so I did my Nutcracker about the original Clara, who went with the Ballet Russe to Paris and later to Australia, and at the end of her days as a dancer, performed and formed the new Australian ballet. So it was a departure point. And I was amazed because people cried at that ballet. People felt real emotion. When you go to Nutcracker, you want the Christmas thrill. You want the wrapping and the parcels and the gloss and the glamour and the glitter. But for me, that music is so much deeper than that. And to me, always my inspiration, if I do a new work using a traditional score, is to go back to the music and find what the composer might have wanted and find the soul of that piece of music.
What is it about your choreography that captivates the audience around the world?
I've had so many lovely opportunities as a choreographer. Having my own company for 30 years meant that I never had to please anybody except myself as a choreographer. And so my works were always a little bit bolder because I wasn't worried about I knew my dancers so well that I knew I could give them anything and they could do it. I knew that I didn't have to please anyone except myself. And I think being very brave gave me a look that was different to other choreographers. Often there is a fashion that happens in choreography, and it seems to happen, every country in the world seems to be producing a similar look. I was really wanting to find a new way of attracting an audience. And I think part of that new way was to make them relate to dancers as real people. I want people to look at the dancers and go, I know what they're feeling. I want them to feel like they could fly like that dancers. I don't want to put them in a glass box like a butterfly that you can look at. I want you to feel a contact and an absolute communication. And communication to me is the magic word in choreography.
What aspect of Giselle particularly fascinated you?
I think as human beings, there is one thing that fascinates us all. Love. The need to be loved, the pain that love can bring, the joy that love can bring. This is a fabulous love story, but it's also a story of betrayal, duplicity, infidelity, love that returns even after madness, a love that survives that, a love that survives death. So for me, love is important because love is important in everyone's life. But to depict it with meaning and with care and not as a frivolous adventure in romance, is really important. But I love the aspect of the spirit world putting things right. That the karma, if you like, of wrongdoing can be resolved and resurrected, and love can survive almost all hardships.
Did you always know that you wanted to redo Giselle at some point of your life?
I had been dropping hints for a long time.
Oh, really?
Australian Ballet, other companies around the world going, don't you think Giselle could do with a makeover? Don't you think she needs a facelift? And a lot of people just go, oh no, that is the one sacred work. You cannot touch it. And that is why I have such admiration for Julia, who obviously, having been a Giselle herself, would have had very strong feelings about how Giselle should be protected, nurtured. And when I said I wanted to do this, she was very excited about it. And I'm so happy because, in a sense, unless she'd said that, I think I would have just done yet another slightly different version,
of
you know.
It was the day before Graeme Murphy's Giselle was set to be unveiled, and it was quite a frenzy backstage before the final rehearsal. The creative staff from Australia and the dancers and the staff of Universal Ballet were busy perfecting every detail.
Powerful. Boom, boom, boom. So unbalanced.
The main and assistant choreographers made a final examination to make sure everything would flow seamlessly, just as intended. And the final rehearsal kicked off.
Thank you, Stop. Thank you. It sounded beautiful, it was fast. Can we go back to the first solo perhaps and just set a tempo?
It was a physically draining process, having to dance non-stop, but the dancers poured their hearts and souls into their final rehearsal before the world premiere.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm seriously thinking.
Murphy and Vernon visited the dressing room after wrapping up the rehearsal.
But it was the first time, technically, with all the technical stuff.
Not
you
only
know?
music,
So-
it was everything was like,
Yeah.
and, you know, we were looking at everything, trying to look at you, trying to look at the lights. I was happy, darling. I was really happy because you were on top.
They showed concern for the dancers' well-being, and they didn't forget to offer them words of encouragement to motivate them. Graeme Murphy carefully inspected everything from the lighting and the set to the music to deliver a flawless performance the next day. The new Giselle that he and his staff had been working on for months was about to be brought to life.
The most drastic change for me is that you added that intense prologue in the beginning. How did you come to that idea?
Well, one of the most important things is it looking at why Myrta became so vile and who Berthe, Giselle's mother, is. So it was important to me to create a scenario where the mother has a recurring dream, a nightmare of when Myrta took her husband and she just managed to save the baby Giselle from Myrta. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why is Myrta evil? And you have to say to yourself, well, it's
There's a
Berthe,
history.
the mother of Giselle and Myrta loved the same man.
That makes sense.
He chose Berthe. And Myrta killed herself and became an eternal, avenging, evil spirit. So that night when she gets revenge on Berthe, Giselle's mother, is like the recurring nightmare. So the prologue is this nightmare that she has every night. But of course now she has developed her shaman powers and she has a crystal that protects her clan. She is the protector of her clan. And I like this little mystical thing that happens because it gives me a chance to do a lot more drama.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I didn't even know Jesus' mother had a name before.
Yeah,
That was
that's
a news to me.
right. Exactly. It was always Mama.
Yeah, so
Giselle's
it's
Mama.
that much depth to the characters, which I loved it. Of course, recreating Giselle has been done before in the past by big or smaller companies around the world, and they all stuck with the original score by
Yes.
Adolphe Adam. But this time, you wanted a whole new score. Why?
The truth is that because I danced Giselle, you know, as a boy, as a young dancer, Janet also danced at Queen of the Wheelies, etc. This is the one ballet in history that has hardly changed. It was fiddled with, corrected in the early days. It went to bed for a long time before they did it again. But when we look at it now, almost universally, every company in the world does exactly the same. There's very little variation. Now, if I'm as a choreographer, why would I bother to do a ballet where the music and the music are glued together? You can't separate them. I had so much trouble trying to rethink. So I asked Julia Moon if she would consider doing something that was almost a sacrosanct, sacred work, actually taking it and going, I can give this new life, but not with an old score. And you know, I understand that people love the music and love the ballet, but I have to say, I'm doing a new ballet. I'm not killing the old one.
Exactly.
It will exist long after I'm gone. But maybe letting an audience see a new approach will spark another, and they will look at the original differently. Because sometimes I think we go, and in the comfort of knowing the work so well as an audience, we sit and we drift into our own thoughts. And really, what do you look at when you see Giselle? You compare this ballerina with that ballerina. Do you really look at the story? Do you really get involved in the passion? Yeah, we love the mad scene, but you're going, oh, she was a good actor, but I think that she was a better actress in that work. I wanted people to have to think brand new, a shock. Actually have to stay awake and feel it. But I also had so much fun because the original story is such a good story.
You asked Christopher Gordon to be your composer, and you worked with him before in the film Mao's Last Dancer, but he has never composed a full-length ballet before, so it was kind of risky for him as well.
I love that risk. You know, it's not a great risk. I've seen his work in the concert hall at the Sydney Opera House. I worked with him very closely because the music for Mao's Last Dancer was all about dance, and I had to interact as a choreographer with him a lot.
I was instantly very, very excited. It's a terrific story. I love fantasy. I love fantasy movies. So it was like a chance to write a great big score. Well, I thought it would be nice to give a Korean touch to it. This is not actually Korean music, of course. It's Western music. But I thought it was nice just to give it, because it's a Korean company, a Universal Ballet company, to give it a Korean flavour. So we used, in particular, the kayagum and also a number of percussion instruments.
I thought Christopher Gordon did a wonderful job. I mean, some sections are really powerful. Now let's talk about the choreography. I saw, and also dancers told me, that your choreography was quite experimental in the beginning, and from what I saw, all the movements flowed very organically all throughout the ballet. What was the key elements of your choreography in this production?
Well, first of all, I think logic is important in dance. The storytelling is really important. And you know, I want to get this right. I'm not saying that everything I do is right the first time, but I look at the story and I go, really, that character, what is the thread of that person? What is the background? What is the history of that person? Because unless you know someone's past, you don't know their future, or you don't know who they are. You have to build from the past. So I gave dancers a history of characters. You know, I always wondered who Giselle's father was in the original. He disappeared. We never saw him. We never met him. I always wondered why Myrta was such a horrible, horrible woman, and why she killed men. You know, so I had to find ways to make this work. I also had to find a choreographic language that didn't freak the dancers out too much. They're beautiful technicians. I had a responsibility to use their beautiful technique. I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable in a work that felt too contemporary for them and made, because these are well-trained, exquisite ballet dancers. And I had to find a language that was still fresh and original. I hate to work in cliches. I think, you know, in ballet, it's sometimes, I think, the only step that exists is an arabesque. You see an arabesque 5,000 times, but you don't see variations and adventures with that arabesque. You can take the classical technique is such a strong technique that you can bend it and move it and progress it and regress it and play with it, and then it starts to get interesting. I'm also interested that today's audiences, young audiences, have a different attention span. In the old ballets, you could hold an arabesque for what seems like 10 minutes, and the audiences can look at it and appreciate it. Today's world of fast-moving imagery, the young people, their attention span is 2 seconds, not 2 minutes, you know? So I always want to evolve, as you said, to let each step evolve into another, to keep it organic, to keep it moving. Because quite frankly, there is a new world out there, and we have to bring them into the ballet. Otherwise, our art form will turn into stone and become a series of statues, you know. And for me, it's so important and so exciting, you know. They're out there for us. They're out there waiting for us to grab their attention and bring them into the world of dance.
Dancers from UBC, although they have done some contemporary works by Kilian or Nacho Dueto or Forsyth, they're still very much accustomed to classical ballets and romantic ballets. Was it kind of difficult to teach them your style of movements in the beginning?
I think they thought I was a madman, you know, because also I don't create in a linear, logical way. I jump around. And for me, explaining the poetry is very important. Well, when you have a language barrier, that becomes a little difficult. But I find dancers are so smart. I demonstrate until my legs nearly fell off, because when you don't have that language, you have to show intention, body movement, emotion. You have to exaggerate so that they really get it. They were good from that point of view. They started to understand me, and then they started to understand my vocabulary. That, you know, the lifting, it will never be a simple lift. It will always develop into a more complicated and then go in another direction. So for them it was a big journey. It was a big journey. And I think particularly for the corps de ballet, because if you've been in the corps de ballet of Giselle, you are very limited. You are allowed to do this and nothing else. The acting is very 18th century mime. And I wanted all these people to be real, and suddenly I was saying, no, you have to take responsibility for your character. Who are you? You know, you are one of the clan. You are one of the men that protect the clan. You are terrified of the spirits that live outside at night. The women hate those spirits because they can lose their men. I had to make dramas and explain stories. And once that happened, they started to take initiative, and that was so exciting. Very exciting. But I think for the principals, having a classical basis which is quite rigid, and then asking them to melt on point, having them do strange point work, having them slide on point. It was a
experimental.
It was a big ask, and they were fabulous.
On April 22, 2015, the Universal Ballet began their rehearsals for Graeme Murphy's Giselle. Under the tutelage of Graeme Murphy and the assistant choreographer Janet Vernon, the dancers were ready to assimilate and master new dance sequences that they'd never attempted before.
처음에는 굉장히 어려웠어요. 제가 적응할 때 개인적으로 너무 클래식 지젤에 익숙해져 있다 보니까 음악도 다르고 안무도 원하시는 게 딱 있어서 저는 적응하는데 시간이 좀 길게 걸렸어요, 사실.
It was undeniably a laborious process for the dancers to pick up the new dance sequences. But through this challenge, they were able to unleash their potential and further hone their craft.
Do you know, it's beautiful when you get a breakthrough. You know, one day suddenly they'll just get it and they start to grow with it. And the dancers have to understand that what Graeme's choreographing on them is something that they are actually creating along with him as well. So in fact, they own the movement really, because no one else has done this. You know, it's just them and their body. So I think once they can accept that and then start to feel more comfortable, it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling as a dancer when you suddenly find a new way of moving, a new freedom, a new voice.
Now let's talk about the costumes. You asked Jennifer Arirang to be your designer. What was it about Jennifer that you wanted to give her the job, and what specific request did you make?
Well, you know, I think it's so hard when you come to a new country and everything around you is new. I would have loved to have worked with some Korean designers in both set and costume, because I think people here are fascinating. But when you have a very limited time, you have to trust your team so considerably. You don't have that time to develop.
True.
And I've worked with Jennifer for so long, and she has made so many costumes for my productions over the years. And she's a wonderful designer. And now she works with Aboriginal a company a lot, with Bangara, which is an Australian Aboriginal company who do fabulous contemporary works. And she has this sense of ethnicity. She understands that she can do high fashion, but she can do earthy too. And for me that was very important.
Gerard Magnon, he really sets the tone that says, this is Korean version of Giselle. Was that your intention as well?
It was all our intentions, to make it feel comfortable, to make it feel like part of society, to make it realistic, to make it relevant. And the composer using Korean instruments was fabulous. Gerard using Korean mountains and Korean trees, and for me, thinking of the spirits in a different way. You know, often in Asian culture, there are avenging spirits who come back and make things right. In China, in the Peony Pavilion, there is a woman who has died, and she interacts and changes things, and I like this. It is really quite interesting. I think that it would have been silly to have done this work and make it feel like it was Eurocentric,
I see.
or that it belonged in Australia, or you know, working with what gives things a Korean flavour, Korean people. It's not about an aesthetic. I'm working with the most beautiful Korean dancers. Therefore, something about their personalities, which is truly Korean, is got to come through, and I love that. It's not so much customs that make countries what they are. It's people who make countries what they are.
Yes, this production is very visually obvious that being premiered in Korea has a huge impact on this production. So in that sense, do you think that this was very successful in your mind?
Look, it's hard for me to be objective. I'm so close to the creative process, you know. I am now just starting to look, and as I said, see what is good and see what is wrong, and make those decisions. But what I love is that there has been a great feeling of embracing from the company for the work, that there is a sense the dancers now own this work. Because I'm a choreographer, I can only give people a step, then they have to make it their own. If it's going to be good, it is because they have embraced it and imbibed it, drunk it into their bodies and made it theirs. It is stupid for me to be a dictator when I'm giving you a present. It is yours, take it now. And I said that to the dancers.
Is there anything that you want to ask your audience to pay extra special attention to?
You know, people will analyze this work. You know, Julia is so smart that she knows that I have made Mert tell Giselle she must kill Albrecht with her own hands. And that leads into a solo. All of these little clues are all there. All the thematic, the drag step, which is first is full of love, and then finally becomes full of death. And there are motifs that come from beginning to end. There's meaning, there is new symbols for death, new symbols for life, new symbols for love. The only reason we know those is the original Giselle has had symbols that has been around for 170 years. Audiences have got to read them. I hope that one day audience will look at my Giselle and know the inner workings, the secrets of the work, and it will give them even more enjoyment than just the pure physicality.
The day has finally come for Graeme Murphy's Giselle to be unveiled in Korea, and the highly anticipated ballet drew streams of ballet and contemporary dance enthusiasts to the venue. The curtains were raised, and the powerful music captivated the audience in an instant. The exquisite choreography and the dancers' emotional performances drew gasps of awe from the audience. And once again, people realized why Graeme Murphy is called a master storyteller.
This ballet really cool for me. That is really new, this is really fresh and really good idea for me, especially.
Because Graeme Murphy's Giselle was being premiered in Korea, it's also been called the Korean Giselle, with Korean elements incorporated into the music, set, costumes, and many other aspects. Giselle is an iconic romantic ballet that tells a story of the pain and unrequited love, as well as eternal love that's so strong that it even overcomes death. Nearly everything was changed from the original ballet, except for the main plot. The innovative and unprecedented performance had the audience's eyes glued to the stage until the very end. Murphy is known for breathing new life into classical ballets and contributing to their evolution. The revamped Giselle, with the right amount of classical and modern touches, will serve as a catalyst for the creation of experimental ballets around the world.
This isn't your first time working in Asian companies. You worked with the Shanghai Ballet before, and how was your experience working in Universal Ballet?
I have to say that I think the organization has a great feeling of rapport. I look at the various departments and there is good communication within. I think that publicity, I think that ballet staff are unbelievably good and unbelievably committed, and that the standard of the dances, it has everything, absolutely everything, and I think it deserves its successes, and I think it deserves more international recognition. And I think and I pray that I can be part of that process. I like to think that a new work will create curiosity abroad, because we can't really survive unless we are global. You know, this is no longer a time when, you know, like the Russian ballet, maybe the Bolshoi never needs to travel. But I think in this world that we live in, and I also think that something that's been created like this is the best diplomatic development between Australia and Korea. I mean, I'm so happy that I've been part of this new adventure, and that part of the first time that Universal have done such a big adventure from the ground up, and they've let me be a part of it. I'm so grateful.
So you would definitely come back and work with them, because
in a blink.
The love and affection that you and Janet showed to the dancers was quite moving for me to watch. So that was beautiful. If you please, would you like to take us back to the day when you and Julia Moon, who is of course the CEO of Universal Ballet, met for the first time, and what happened that day?
I think, we were both a little bit nervous of meeting each other. Julia we had met in Japan because Julia saw my Swan Lake and liked it very much. And we had a very brief meeting after.
I see.
Just a casual hi, after. And I thought, what a beautiful, elegant woman, and how interesting what she's doing in Korea is. But it was a long, convoluted journey to get to the point where we sat down in a hotel in Sydney on the beautiful harbour and talked about she actually said, what would you like to do for my company? And I didn't think for very long because, as I told you, in the back of my head was Giselle, I want to do this ballet one day, please let me. And at that point I didn't know that she was a really happy and successful Giselle. And I thought to myself, well, when I said it, I saw, and then I talked about it, and she said, she had a frisson, a little shiver went through her, and I thought, this could be the right time, the right place, the right situation. And from there, because this company was so warm and so inviting, it flowed very well, really. I think it's a year and a half since we first talked about it. And in the world of ballet, that is quite a quick gestation period.
It is.
The artist and the choreographer work together like partners to create something new. And it's a whole different dimension from the artist's point of view because they actually are the inspiration for the piece and the instruments of creating the work. And I felt that it was very important for Korean artists to have this process to learn how to work with the choreographer to create something new.
What's the feedback that you got the most by the Korean audience after the premiere?
Look, I can really only gauge the support, the applause level. People say lovely things to me. The people who hate it probably don't come up and say, Graeme, I hated your ballet. They're probably too polite. I'm always thinking that wait until this work has matured, has grown, has developed, has its own life, has its own force, and then we will see where it will go. I actually, in my heart, think that to get this to this level, in such a short time, to get it to this point is quite miraculous.
Yes.
And I'm just hoping that there is time to nurture the baby and time to develop its possibility and potential so that it grows into something really exciting. And I have the Korean public have made me believe that is a possibility and that will happen. I don't think they've been dismissive because sometimes ballets only have one season and they're never done again. I feel that there is curiosity, and where there's curiosity, there is hope.
Would you do anything differently when you do it next time?
Oh, let me start. I would take it from the ground up, and I would, the skeleton is good. The whole bone structure is really lovely. It's got good cheekbones. It's got strong muscles. It just needs it needs more work. It needs more flesh. It needs more commitment from every dancer. It needs more involvement with an audience to continue its journey. Yes, sure, I would. But as an artistic director and a choreographer, I know that the works I did in Sydney Dance Company, their next season they were better. The next season they were better. One day I said, I don't need to do anything more to this work. This work can now be free to do what it was. So I want to get to that point.
Okay. You've not only choreographed ballets, but you also worked in operas, musicals, and films. Is there a new project that you'd like to undertake or planning to do?
It's funny because I don't actually have this massive passion to do a ballet at the moment, because I think Giselle drained every little bit of blood from my body. I feel like a willy. I'll float away. But there are some projects that really excite me, and often in theatre, I love opera so much. I love to direct opera. I'd like to do more opera. But I'd
Any
also,
particular reason?
you know, opera is a very static art form, and when I do an opera, it is not static. And
see.
audiences are like overwhelmed that a whole chorus of singers can actually do things that are interesting to watch, because a choreographer can make people look good in movement, you know, and a director can often make people look good just with sets and lighting and costumes. So I love to do opera because it excites me, and I'm such a music freak. I just love all sorts of music, contemporary music particularly, and so that's an interesting point. But I was thinking about, you know, the potential to make a musical of Mao's Last Dancer, because it's a fabulous story.
It is.
And I've already done the movie, and so, you know, maybe that might come into being at some stage. Well, interesting, because Janet and I won the Fred Astaire Award in New York for the choreography in that movie.
So, since you mentioned Janet, she plays a very important role in your life as a creator. What I've seen, you see the big picture, and Janet sees the important little details.
Amazing.
And what a perfect match.
It is extraordinary. As a choreographer, I could give her anything, and she made me look good as a choreographer. I go, oh wow, this is what all dancers should be able to do, make choreographers look better than they are. She could breathe the next step, and I would go, oh, I know what I'm going, because you could see the process, and we could just work so, and you'll see all the footwork in my ballets really quite fast. It was because she had the most articulate feet. She could use her feet like chopsticks.
Oh,
she was
I see.
amazing. And this made she flavored my style of choreography, because I built things around her. And then I realized that by building things around her, someone who has such a good technique, then all dancers suddenly want to do this sort of movement, because it develops their own movement ability. So she's been important. Creatively, we can talk about and she can zoom into faults. And you know, I get offended. That was a good step. And then, oh, it could be better. That would work better. So it's a lovely team. We're really happy from that point of view, and we feel very alive when we work together. We feel like we're 16 again. We met when we were 16, and we feel like, you know, there we are again, 16, because the energy that you get in the arts, surrounded by beautiful young dancers, is so energizing. So we're lucky, and I'm so lucky to have her and her belief, you know. And she's fierce. She's ferocious.
She's fierce.
She's feisty.
She's feisty. And here's what she has to say.
How is it working, or how has it been working? My God, it's been over so many years. We knew one another when we were 15, 16 at the Australian Ballet School. So we've been working together a long time. So we don't know anything other than that, you know. When we were actually dancing together, as well as Graeme choreographing, there used to be many fights in the studio, many fights. But it was always for the same thing. We always wanted to have the best of whatever we could get. I adore working with him now, because I'm not dancing anymore, obviously. So I have more time to be by his side and be with him every step of the way for the choreographic process. And I have to say, it's a joy. It's a joy.
And lastly, what kind of choreographer would you like to be remembered as?
You know, I recently wrote my will, my last will and testament, saying that after I die, I don't want my works to be performed.
Really?
It was a really interesting process, and there was a lot of controversy when people found out that I'd said this in the dance community. But I had
But that's a crime.
I think what's worse crime is when you see Martha Graham's works reproduced today, and they have none of the spirit of Martha. And when you see many choreographers' works, even though they're lovingly reproduced, without the voice, it can be so flat, and it makes me so sad when I see, you know, Alvin Ailey work. Oh, it's wonderful that they're still done, but they sort of become period pieces, historic and not living. Now with Sydney Dance Company, I don't think any company except my company of 30 years could do those works. Because this was a hand-picked group of artists that were trained in my style for 30 years, that understood my thought process. To get another company to do that is very, very difficult. Maybe one or two works, if I'm still alive, I could generate on another company. Swan Lake, I think I should let the Australian Ballet do that because it's their signature piece.
Yes.
And because they have done it for 12 years every year, it's in the DNA of the dancers. But I'm not so vain that I think that I need to be remembered through my dance. I think it's really the next generation. It's funny. I look at history and I go, well, I wish I'd been there when Nijinsky was there. I was lucky I worked with Nureyev, Fontaine, Baryshnikov. I've worked with them all. But you know, at the end of the day, dance is about progress. And I think that's why I do new versions of things, because I want the art form to stay alive and vibrant. And if you keep doing dead people's works, what about the new choreographers who need a chance?
Wow.
Because choreography is rare. You know, there aren't enough choreographers. They need more opportunities.
But that came as a shock to me.
Really?
Yeah, very shocking. Before you go, would you like to say a few words to your fans looking at that camera?
This camera here.
Yes.
Well, I would like to say thank you so much for letting me share this Australian, letting me share your Korean experience, your Korean food, your Korean applause, and above all, work with some of the most beautiful dancers I've worked with in my entire career. Thank you so much, and I want to come back and keep this work alive and well and growing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for leading us to the wonderful world of ballet, and I'm looking forward to your next projects. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.